Hello everybody, this week's project starts with a lump of Sculpey clay. This type of modeling clay is actually plastic. You can put it in the oven when you're finished making your mold and it will cure it to make it rock hard. The mold I'm making will be used to cast aluminum. The castings will be used to make a heat shield for the exhaust on a Harley. The molds are made so they have a certain amount of draft to them. This means they have a slight taper, so I can pull it away from the mold without having to break the mold. Also, any other details that would get it stuck in the mold are added afterwards. Now that the mold has been cured in the oven, petroleum jelly is smeared over its surface to work as a releasing agent. The mold is then placed in the center of a box that is made out of plexiglass and tape. Some plaster of Paris is then mixed up and poured over the mold. After the plaster of Paris sets, I remove it from the box. I ran sheetrock screws into the Sculpey mold so I could pull it out of the plaster of Paris. The plaster of Paris is then left to cure and dry for about a month. If the mold is not allowed to cure and dry, then when the hot aluminum hits the mold, it'll steam. Not only is this dangerous, it will also ruin the casting. The hot steam trying to exit the mold when the hot aluminum hits on the top can basically explode and throw molten metal all over the place. Apparently, I didn't let this mold dry enough, and you can see the steam escaping underneath the aluminum. That's what all the bubbling is. The aluminum was stuck in the mold, so I had to break the mold to get the aluminum out. And here you can see all the porosity in it. Temp 2 worked much better. I baked it in the oven quite a bit longer. And to all the safety Nazis out there, I know I'm supposed to have protective gear on. I don't have any, so don't bother me with 90 texts telling me about it, please. Thank you. If you notice, I left the plaster of Paris mold up on top of the forge to make it nice and hot. This will also help bake out any leftover water that might be there. By the way, the reason I use plaster of Paris as a mold medium is because you can use it multiple times. If you mix some sand with the plaster of Paris, about 50%, it's actually even more durable. My forge is actually made out of 50% hydrocal, which is a hard type of plaster of Paris, and 50% sand, and I've been using it for several years. I just cleaned off the dross off the top of the crucible. It's just a bunch of impurities that generally float on the top. A little bit of steam did bubble out of the mold. The aluminum stayed molten though long enough for the steam to dissipate, so it was fine. This is what the mold looked like after about 8 or 9 castings. It was pretty much shot by then. I got several cracks in it that was so bad I actually wired it together, but it still continued to work. This is sort of a progression from the raw casting on the left to where I've added details on the right. I carved the details out with a Dremel, a die grinder, and a high-speed engraver my mother-in-law had given me a few years ago. I probably could have done the whole thing with just a Dremel, but the high-speed engraver and my die grinder actually sped things up quite a bit. Here's where I was using my die grinder to take out a bunch of material around the eye sockets and the temples. After all the details were finished, I sanded it and polished the living crap out of them. Then I painted them all flat black. It doesn't look flat black because I took the photo while it was still wet, and while it was still wet, I wiped all the paint off with a rag, leaving all the recesses and crevices alone. This gives the skulls a lot more depth and contrast. Again, here's a progression. This is a piece of scrap aluminum I had laying around. The back of it will be cut concave. There'll be 4 holes drilled through it, and there will be 3 places for hose clamps to attach to it. This is how the skulls will mount to the exhaust pipe. There is a decorative piece shown here that goes in between the mounting bracket and the skulls. This was made out of a thin piece of sheet aluminum that I rounded off the edges, bent it around a piece of bar, and painted it flat black. The water stains that you see running down the side of the bike are for me installing some header wrap on the back exhaust pipe. Putting it on while it's wet makes it much easier to install, and the water stains will just wash up with some soap and water later. The purpose of the skulls was to try to hide some of this unsightly wrap. Well, that's all for this week. Please like, subscribe, and comment.